Morning. Happy Tuesday. So today I have a book review, I, Robot, Isaac Asimov. So this book was it was actually written in 1940 to 1950 because it's a collection of short stories. It was published in 1950. This is a collection of 9 short stories that Asimov wrote. It's uniquely framed and cohesive in the sense that you have a main character, even though she's not prevalent in all 9 stories, but how it works as a cohesive story or collection is you have an interviewee who's interviewing Dr. Susan Calvin, who was a robopsychologist and worked with the U.S. robotics for a Dr. Lanning, I believe it was his name. And so of these 9 stories, you have some good ones and you have some ones that are okay. So we'll get into that as well. Before I get into what I like and dislike, though, obviously you probably know about the movie I, Robot with Will Smith that was in 2004. It is loosely based on a short story in here called Little Lost Robot. It's really tied to that, really, in just concept. The story in the book really has nothing to do with what the movie is about. At no part in any of these 9 short stories is there like this revolt where the robots turn on humanity type thing. It is loosely kind of hinted, and it's open-ended in some places, but never like where you're like the movie. I mean, obviously for the movie they had to have something that was going to draw people in. Nothing. The book and the movie are just so far apart. It's really a huge contrast, and I was a little bit shocked by that. Not that I was really wanting it, but we'll talk about that. Before I get started about what I like and dislike and talk about some of the characters and some of the moments in the book, I do not have really anything here that's going to be spoiler in terms of spoiling the enjoyment if you haven't read this book. I do recommend that you do read the book. I'll give you my rating at the end. So let's talk about what I liked. So I really liked 2 specific characters. I liked Donovan and Powell. They are these field test engineers that work for this US robotics company. And they go out and work on, mining robots on asteroids and planets. And they were in a couple, I think 3, maybe 4 of the stories. Maybe a 4th one was kind of loosely at the end. I enjoyed them. Some of the stories are a little rough, I didn't like, and they get a little technological and they get a little philosophical, which is kind of a trope for 1950, 1940 early sci-fi books, which I understand, but not really my cup of tea. But I did like Donovan and Powell because when Asimov wrote those stories with those characters, there's humor. There's definitely a relationship there that has some butting of heads that makes it enjoyable. You have kind of, 2 guys that have some wittiness to them at points. And so I found that pretty interesting. This first story, Robbie, I found that one interesting. It's overall, it's kind of about a girl that has kind of a robot butler friend type thing, and she's very connected emotionally to the robot. She doesn't really go out and socialize. The robot's her best friend, and the mom starts having issues with it, and so her and her husband have some conflict about that. And I found that story interesting again because it had some substance and you can connect to some emotions and some thoughts, and that was interesting. I liked Evidence, which I think is the 8th of the 9 short. It's the 8th of the 9 short stories in the book. The character Berkeley, I found him interesting. That particular short story kind of is around, is he a robot? Is he a human? And so you had some mystery, which I found that was pretty interesting. What I disliked at times it gets philosophical. I get it. When this was wrote, that was kind of where the genre was at. It does get a little technological, and some of the stories, when those were obviously the stories that I was less keen on. The framing of this collection is a little loose. I understand, you have an interviewer that's interviewing Dr. Calvin as a robot psychologist, and she's telling her these stories about her times with this company and what she's dealing with as a freelance, robo psychologist. It's loose. I mean, it doesn't really cohese all the stories. I mean, you get a little lost, and those are the stories that I didn't really care for. Excuse me. The end of this, the ninth story, again, you have Berkeley coming back as a character in that one, which was, I was good. I was glad that the last story was going to continue to have him, because I liked him as a character in story 8. It's anticlimactic though. I only liked that last one because it had him as a character. It doesn't really go anywhere though. Again, if you're wanting to read this book because you're like, oh, this is gonna be like the movie, it is nothing like the movie. So you don't have a revolt. Asimov did not want anything to do with that, although he hints at times about that somewhat in the stories, loosely and very soft-handed. They never go, and there's never any of that where the robots turn on humanity. So overall, it's very anticlimactic in places. So that can turn people off. And I really felt like emotions were a struggle for Asimov. That's probably why I didn't kind of connect with some of the stories. When he was writing about Robbie and the girl and having the robot and being connected, like, that was good. When you have Donovan and Powell and they're back and forth, and it's good. But you can tell at certain points when Donovan and Powell get into these situations, like, they just kind of like ho hum about it, where they're not like mad and ticked and what are we gonna do? Like, it's just kind of like, again, it's 1950. A lot of the technology that is written, because these stories basically take place of Calvin's career as a robot psychologist from 1980 to 2050. The technology that he writes about, predicts about in the stories, I should say, is still dated. So overall, I gave the book a 3.5 out of 5. I'm glad I read it. I've been wanting to read this for a long time. I, like most people, thought this was going to have some tie-ins to the movie. And I thought the movie and the book were going to be close, more kind of similar to a certain point. Obviously, 99.9% of the time, the books are better than the movies. I mean, it's nothing like the movie. So if you're wanting to pick this book up and be like, hey, I like that movie, I want to read that book, it's really not. The only really thing that this in the movie ties to is that one short story and concept, and the fact that the 3 laws are present, the 3 laws of robotics. So that's really it. Again, I enjoyed it. It's a good book. It's not a great book. It's a good book. It's not a bad book, although it's not like top tier good, if that makes sense. But anyways, that's a book review. I hope you're enjoying your Tuesday. I hope you got through the eclipse. And I hope to talk to you again. Have a good week.